Good morning. 4 minutes after 10 is the time. I hope this finds you well. I always used to begin letters with that. I hope this finds you well. I really do, because you could be forgiven for feeling a little bit beleaguered today, possibly even a little bit battered. It could be worse, of course. You could be in that processing centre in Dover. But I'm going to obviously talk about Suella Braverman. I'm going to talk about the speech she delivered in the House of Commons yesterday, which was disgusting, although I appreciate that some people loved it. That's obviously why she made it. Even if Charlotte Lynch hadn't this morning unearthed a story about her reportedly turning down hotel bookings because they were in Conservative constituencies, even if that story hadn't actually dropped this morning exclusively on LBC, thanks to the sterling work of Charlotte Lynch, then I would still be trying to explain to you the level of gross political opportunism that was on display yesterday. But I guess Charlotte's story in many ways is the cherry on the icing on the cake. And you know how reluctant I am to use the F word. I'm beginning to wonder whether that's a mistake. I've shared this with you a few times. The idea that we're so desperate to believe that the really bad stuff can't happen in our own country that we actually fight a little shy of deploying the language that we should deploy. It's a pincer movement this morning. Indulge me for a minute, if you would. It's a pincer movement because you sort of think, well, that language is quite fascistic. Talking about invasions, I mean, it's fascism 101. But this is the United Kingdom. This is Britain. We don't really do fascism. You know, it's not really our way of doing things. But what countries did think that they were the kind of country where that could did Brazil think that it could have fascist or far-right leaders? Did America think that they even wrote books in America about how it couldn't happen here and what have you. So I don't know where the point is, but the pincer movement, of course, is the other side of the coin, which is, oh yes, all those do-gooding lefties, all those yogurt-knitting lefties are getting their knickers in a right old twist, and so well played. So she set a trap, old Suella the genius. She set a trap, and all the lefties who have pathetic views like not wanting migrant processing centres to be firebombed, they've all gone nuts. They've all fallen into her trap. Look at them all screaming, that's the plan. Ha ha ha, ha ha, suckers owning the libs by flirting with fascism on the floor of the House of Commons. Can't believe you fell for it. And they might have a point as well. I mean, I don't know. One of the most dispiriting phrases in the English language at the moment, and for the record, I absolutely accept that I've almost certainly used it myself. If not on air, then probably on Twitter. So, hypocrisy 101. I'll get the tattoo. But my goodness me, it's upsetting all the right people. Has got to be one of the most corrosive contributions to public discourse. So I've done something disgusting, but it's upsetting all the right people. I've definitely done it myself, except obviously I'm talking about the right people, whereas everyone else is talking about the wrong people. I'm joking. That idea that when you do something that has no real merit in and of itself, but it becomes valid or valuable according to who it upsets and how much it upsets them. So, what do you want from your politicians? Do you want substantive, constructive, improving policies? Do you want solutions to problems? Do you want policies that actually address issues that are facing countries? Or do you want gobbets of bile that are so acidic they end up singeing the skin of your political enemies? Well, in this country at this time, post-Brexit, I'm afraid gobbets of bile that end up singeing the skin of your political enemies constitute pretty much all you're going to get from this Conservative Party. Because make no mistake, 12 years in power and standing up in the House of Commons to describe a shambles, to talk about something that's broken, to discuss something that's unfit for purpose, that is gaslighting on a epic scale. That is a bit like you coming round mine after I've lived there for 12 years and pointing out that, the heating doesn't work, the windows are broken, the roof is leaking, and I say, well, it's not my fault. I've only lived here for 12 years with more than enough money to fix things. What do you mean? Because somehow, what I believe is that they relish this. I mean, what else is there for this government to get on its high horse about, except a migration chaos that they have created and presided over? I can't stress enough how inadequate I feel my words are this morning to actually simply express the absurdity of much of this conversation. This is 12 years into Tory government, okay? David Cameron, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, the other one, Liz something, and then now Rishi Sunak. 12 years, God knows how many Home Secretaries. Probably fewer Home Secretaries than Prime Ministers since 2016. Probably not in the last month, actually. Depends whether you count Suella Braverman twice or not, doesn't it? But 12 years of Tory rule. Borders and immigration and refugees and asylum seekers. Traditionally, right up until 2016, the thing that the British public had been persuaded to care most about, the absolute abiding issue, the bile duct that delivered Brexit with Farage's disgusting posters. Farage dancing around the place, claiming that if we vote to leave the European Union, then all of these people coming into our country would somehow stop coming into our country. You'd think he would be quiet for a while now, wouldn't you, having made every single thing worse by dint of Brexit? Because make no mistake, the numbers of people crossing the English Channel, if it keeps you awake at night, leaving the European Union has made it immeasurably and demonstrably worse. So where are the people saying sorry for telling you that it would get better? Where are the people who hoovered up your votes, harvested your political support, fomented your hatred of fellow human beings and persuaded you to vote to become the first country in history to impose economic sanctions on itself because that would be a price worth paying to stop the foreigners coming in? How's that working out for you? And why aren't you getting cross with the people who lied to you about what would happen instead of the people who told you the truth? One of the great mysteries of the human condition. So the reason why it's so disgusting, I put it to you, and I could well be wrong about this, but the reason why it's so disgusting is not because Suella Braverman deployed fascistic language yesterday. That was the behaviour of a cornered animal. That was the behaviour of a cornered polecat. You know, when you are, it was a bit like when Johnson used lies about Jimmy Savile to try to hurt Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions. When these people are cornered, when they feel the walls closing in from all sides, they will say and do anything to save themselves, because ultimately all they ever care about is themselves. So the deployment of fascistic language, the flirtation with incitement to more violence against refugees, the very day after a processing centre was firebombed, all of that is disgusting. But the logic of it is actually quite plain to see. If you had breached national security, if you had broken the ministerial code 6 times in 6 weeks, if you had ridden roughshod over the requirements of your position and had actually polluted and denigrated one of the highest officers of state, what would you want everybody to be talking about today? Invasions and refugees, your choice of words, and this ongoing crisis on the south coast. Or this ongoing reported crisis on the south coast, because of course it's a crisis of the Conservatives' making. It's a failure to properly address. It's a failure to have systems in place. It's a consequence of cuts. It's a consequence of an absence of political ambition. It's a consequence of performative callousness. It's a consequence of knowing that significant swathes of the Tory base will be jumping up and down with joy at what Suella Braverman said yesterday, because they don't really care about any of the problems. They just care about how vile you can be about other human beings. And that is the bit where the two parts of the population part and can never be brought back together again. I will never understand how a promise to be vile or the deployment of disgusting language to describe other human beings who have done nothing wrong. Find me someone who's done something wrong and you can have a different vocabulary entirely. But people who have done nothing wrong being talked about in terms that you would ordinarily reserve for animals or foreign armies, invading forces, that is deliberate and it is disgusting. But it's also very easy to understand. Comes very naturally to her, this language. That's a worry. That's a concern. But the idea that rabble-rousing, race-baiting demagogues are not ten a penny throughout history is just absurd. That's what you call them. You call them invaders. So how we can even be having this conversation after 12 years of Tory rule actually is incredible. It is, once again, and I know we probably go on about this too much, it's a mark of how corrupted our media is. If there was any semblance of honesty or logic in the right-wing media, they would be hounding this government out of office, because after 12 years, if they truly care about the refugee crisis, after 12 years, to be in such an almighty mess is absolutely unforgivable. It's irredeemable. So it's mission accomplished as far as she's concerned. She's got her own scandalous conduct and national security threatening behaviour off the front pages. She's knocked it into the long grass for a while. And she's got the gammon and pineapple army chomping at the bit and got their bile ducts pumping away on a level that they haven't since the heyday of no deal is better than a bad deal, or whatever that nonsense they used to get excited about was. And the mention of genuine asylum seekers, genuine desperate and vulnerable people, has disappeared entirely from the conversation. We're talking solely about trafficked Albanians who are brought into the country by criminal gangs in order to work as criminals. So they are simultaneously, of course, contributing to crime and victims of crime themselves. But hey-ho, it doesn't matter. 10:15 is the time. So what and I'll talk you through some more of the detail on why it is so ridiculous in a minute. You know, one of the main reasons why we can't, if you like the idea, send people back is because since we left the EU, we haven't renegotiated a replacement for the Dublin Agreement that allows such returns. We don't have returns agreements with home countries or even third safe countries through which people have travelled, such as France or Germany. We don't have the agreements in place. After 12 years of government, 6 years post-Brexit, they haven't done the paperwork that would be needed to get close to doing the things that they claim they need to do. So I'm going to ask you a big and broad question this morning, and I've given you my answer. I think it's a mixture of distraction and depravity, what Suella Braverman did in the House of Commons yesterday. Desperate to distract. The more desperate you are to distract from your own scandalous conduct, the more depraved you will be in your desperate search for some sort of scapegoat. And I'm sorry, but it worked, didn't it? Because what are we talking about today? That's going to be my second question. Do we have any choice? I don't think we do. I have that warning ringing in my ears. Oh, it's upsetting all the right people. That no mark on LBC's got his knickers in a right old twist. It's great, isn't it? 2 days after a migrant processing centre got bombed, they're still upset. Well, of course we're upset. We're human. What are you? 03456060973. So what was Suella Braverman up to in the House of Commons yesterday? What was the plan? Because 12 years of Tory rule, 12 years of Tory failure. How is she possibly able to make political capital out of that? Why are right-wing newspapers today giving her quite an easy ride? I'll tell you what would have made her morning, and I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you for nothing. Daily Mail's giving her the Christian name treatment, the first name treatment. Front page, Suella, : She's done it. She's got the first name treatment. Other newspapers are pointing out the high level of concern at the ugliness of the language that she deployed. Even the Times, Rupert Murdoch's Times, goes for alarm at Braverman's immigration rhetoric. The Mirror inevitably goes further: inflammatory, irresponsible, incompetent, but still in a job. But the Mail gives you Suella, : So she's got them on side. The viler your rhetoric, the more likely the editorial floor of the Daily Mail is to bend the knee. But what was she doing? 03456060973. And cautious though I am about using the F word, is this a moment when we should actually be using it? When a British politician stands up in the House of Commons, when a senior British politician, when the holder of one of the greatest offices of state, not some no-mark backbencher who used to be in the Monday Club, not some ex-UKIP headbanger who has been playing the race-baiting card for their entire career, but when an actual Home Secretary stands up and uses the language that Suella Braverman used yesterday, should we actually stop clutching our pearls and start using the F word? It's 10:19. 22 minutes after 10 is the time. So the question simply is, what was Suella Braverman's plan yesterday, if she had one? Was it simply to distract from her current travails, from the scandals that she has surrounded herself in, despite only having been in the job, well, twice, but for just weeks rather than months? Or was there something much, much uglier going on? Or, of course, the possibility of both. Philip's in Arundel. Philip, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's on your mind?
I think what she was trying to do was effectively just appeal to what I would call the lowest common denominator, I suppose, but the people who supported Brexit, the people who supported Boris Johnson, the mass of people who almost creating a hatred of people trying to legitimately reach this country.
But she didn't mention them. That was the amazing thing in many ways, wasn't it? As far as I'm aware, she didn't mention the people legitimately trying to reach this country. She talked exclusively about criminals being trafficked here to join criminal gangs, the sort of bogus asylum seekers. She didn't talk at all about the 70-odd% or whatever it is of applicants who are found to have a genuine case. That was actually in many ways even uglier than what she didn't say was uglier than what she did say.
Well, absolutely. And this is the other point I was going to make about what she's trying to do before I get on to the illegal question. She's trying to shore up her own position as a darling of the ERG. So that, you know, her position as the Rottweiler of the cabinet, supported by the ERG and the likes of those, I think is a very sort of deliberate political positioning for her.
That's the bit. I mean, it's a luxury, isn't it, to pick over the bones of this in a sort of quasi-academic fashion. But I guess what I wonder, and I don't know that she would have done, actually, and it slightly punctures your idea, if she wasn't in so much trouble, I don't think she'd have done what she did yesterday. She might believe it. She might be comfortable with that kind of language. She might use it in private. We know that she, even in public, talks about her dreams of deporting people. That's not politics. That's just something deeply ugly in her psyche. That's not politics. That's not right-wing, left-wing or centrist. That's just gross. That's inhuman.
I totally agree with that.
But she wouldn't have gone in yesterday in the House of Commons if her job wasn't under threat. Not in that way.
Maybe. But another thing she said was, you know, if some people want to remove me, let them try.
Well, exactly. She's trying to knit the two together.
Actually, whether that is language of someone who feels vulnerable or someone who feels quite secure.
It's like I'm a fighter, not a quitter from Liz Truss. A couple of hours before she quit. Of course, and she's trying to intrinsically knit the two together so that anyone calling for Suella Braverman to lose her job over absolutely egregious breaches of national security and the ministerial code is somehow secretly agitating for her to lose her job because they're worried she's going to do a brilliant job of dealing with the refugee crisis. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all, so it's almost certainly in today's Daily Mail. Briefly, Philip, you wanted to say something about the word illegal.
Yes, I think the use of the word illegal has become part of the vernacular.
Yes.
And you alluded to this yesterday, James. These people are not illegal. Under the 1951 Refugee Convention, my understanding is that anyone has a right to reach another country to claim asylum. Now, the heinous Nationality and Borders Bill Act last year sought to make it illegal to cross the channel in boats. But as far as I understand, international law conventionally supersedes domestic law. Anybody in the world can get to another country and claim asylum. So by the very definition of them claiming asylum, they are not illegal until and if their asylum claim is rejected.
Yeah, you're largely right. I think that if the country, their home country, is adjudged to be safe, then they can be returned. But that is a process that has to be gone through, and it takes rather longer in this country than it does in others. Whether that has anything... Well, of course it does. I was going to be sarcastic, but I worry it wouldn't have been clear enough. That is 12 years of Tory rule. The system is creaking at the seams, not fit for purpose. So, and also the idea of a safe country, which is often misrepresented by people saying, well, they should stay in the first safe country they come to. That's not a requirement of the Act. But if you want to send an asylum seeker back to a, quote, safe, end quotes, country through which they have travelled, you need to have a returns agreement with them. And guess what we did when we left the European Union? We tore up our returns agreement with countries like France and Germany. So again, that's on Brexiters, that's on Farage, that's on all the other rabble-rousing race baiters who are suddenly having a bit of a second wind at the moment. Thank you, Philip. Neil's in Alton. Neil, what's she up to? And is it time to use the F word?
Oh, morning, James. Good to speak to you again.
Hello, mate.
James, absolutely. I feel so angry and very emotional about this, actually. James, where I'm coming from, I'm 60 years old now.
Yeah.
And my dad was wounded and lost a leg in fighting Nazism and fascism in World War II. And I feel like the world's got a very short memory about these events. And the parallels that I see, and tell me if I'm wrong, but the parallels that I see in the language that Suella Braverman and others have been deploying over the recent years about groups of society, asylum seekers, immigrants, illegal immigrants, is the parallels between that and the language that's being used in Germany in the 1930s is so clear to me that it scares me. It scares me that it's so easy for politicians to start to whip up this kind of hatred against other human beings and deploy that as a political weapon. And it worries me greatly that
what makes you worry? What makes you worry that things are worse today or yesterday than they were 10 years ago or 6 years ago?
Well, I think without Brexit was the point for me. That was the thing. That was the breaking point for me.
I think we lose. I worry.
Clearly divided the nation.
It did, but I worry that we lose the room a bit when we do this. And I do it a lot more than you do.
That's why I hesitated to say it.
But a lot of people who voted for it will be almost, or hopefully will be just as outraged by what happened yesterday as you are. Plenty of Conservative MPs expressing profound misgivings. I thought you might say the use of the word invasion or some. It's about language, isn't it? That's the needle. The needle moves through the vocabulary of hatred.
Yeah, it is that language. And that is the worrying thing. It's calling it an invasion. It's not an invasion. It's taking out fellow human beings. It's that weaponization of it. It's that use of emotive language to turn groups of society against other groups of society. And they are groups.
Just breaking up the phone a little bit there, but we got the bulk of what you said, and that I think is key. Vocabulary, words are so important, and if we were to substitute the word human for a lot of the words that are used in these contexts, then the feeling would be very, very different. It's hatred of humans that people like Suella Braverman and Nigel Farage deal in. It's hatred of humans. The trick is, of course, to make people think that it's a constituency of humans to which you will never belong. But then I'd remind you what Tony Benn said about governments and the way they treat refugees. You should really pay attention to how governments treat refugees because it will give you an indication of how they would treat you if they got the chance. 10:31 is the time. Lottie Morley is here now with your headlines. 10:36 is the time. The worst bit, which I failed to articulate earlier, and I'll do briefly now before we head back to the phones, the worst bit is that this sort of rhetoric is not a good idea even for people who want or have fallen for it. Because building political popularity on promises to be vile to people means that the people you're promising to be vile to have to stay there. You don't want to solve a problem. If your political popularity is built upon a promise to be horrible to Mexicans or to be horrible to Puerto Ricans or to be horrible to refugees or to be horrible to Romanians or to be horrible to anybody, if your political... Look at Trump. You need the people to be there. If you could actually wave a magic wand and remove the people that you're demonizing from society, actually crikey, even as I said those words, I thought of the Holocaust. You need the people to be there. So Suella Braverman is not particularly interested in fixing any of these problems. She is more interested in using them to ignite more hatred and ignite more populist support for herself. Make no mistake about that. I do agree that was a very deliberate move yesterday, but I still wonder whether she would have behaved so desperately and so disgustingly if she wasn't in so much trouble. And some client journalists have tugged their forelock and doffed their cap and compliantly gone along with the ludicrous claim that people aren't really bothered about her breaches of ministerial code and contempt for national security and indeed her lies about why and how she lost her job the first time round. They're actually really cross with her about her hatred of refugees. They're really cross about her determination to fix this problem that she's done absolutely nothing to fix, and has actually, since she came into office, made much worse. And how stupid do you have to be, or how bigoted do you have to be, to let them treat you like that? Oh, it's got nothing to do with the things she's actually done. It's all to do with fear of things she might do. That's why we want her out of the job. So what is it that these mythical people would actually be worried about? If you stop people coming to this country in small boats, no one's going to be cross with you. You know? I guess if there are still no safe routes through which to come, then countries in the rest of Europe that already do way more than us per capita are going to be doing even more, so they might get a little bit cross. But nobody in this country, if people are prevented from making the unsafe crossing, nobody's going to actually be cross with you. So what's she talking about when she says they don't want me to fix it? What do you mean? It doesn't make any sense. They don't want me to fix it. They're trying to get rid of me. Let them try. Well, what do you mean? No, but literally nobody is in favour of dangerous channel crossings in flimsy dinghies, often involving women and children. No, literally nobody is wearing a badge saying, I love them, I love channel. So if you really are serious about stopping them, who's actually going to be cross? You silly person. Clara is in Teesdale. Clara, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, Clara.
Listening to you this morning, I do agree that I think if she hadn't been in trouble, I think that's what you said, wasn't it? That she's gone down this rhetoric. And I just wonder if it's sort of, in a way, grasping at straws and trying to change things, and then taking out of Trump's playbook. You know, you mentioned Trump there. Because
definitely.
In his campaign in 2016, I mean, I think it was quite shocking to a lot of people at the time. He was talking about caravans of people coming and rapists and you know, and right-minded people were shocked at that. But then it became apparent that he was getting support and people were, you know, taking on board. And then you look at him now, and there he is. He's still got this support. He's head of the Republican Party, the MAGA, if you like, and some of the vile things that he's saying. And yet people are still supporting him, and it's
got worse now. They've moved from the sort of, if you like, textbook demonization of humans to actual blatant lies and lying about numbers, lying about counting, lying about the election result. Yeah,
and that's what sort of concerns me, that, you know, there could be some of these younger politicians that are coming up there that, you know, let's face it, she's ambitious.
Yes.
And also, you know, they can't in a way accuse her of any kind of racism or whatever, because she herself has got that, you know, that background. And I mean, I read an interesting.
What's your background,
statement.
Clara, if you don't mind me asking, before I ask you my next question?
I came over in 1956 as a Hungarian refugee.
Oh.
And my parents and we got asylum here. And I was just saying to your researcher how I've got such lovely memories of this country growing up, because, you know, we had support, we were welcomed, and I'm now a 70-year-old grandmother. Obviously, there's a lot of people get really surprised when they find out my background, because obviously talking to me and looking at me, you know, I just look like somebody said to me, oh, I just thought you were just quite normal, you know, around here. And
yes.
And I thought, well, yes, but maybe, you know, had I had a brown skin or black skin, let's face it,
yes,
would some of the people now in this current climate, knowing about my background, would they view me differently? You know, it's something that has concerned me.
Some people would. I think some people would, wouldn't they?
Yeah,
sadly.
Yeah.
We know.
And I mean, we live in a small community, and as I say, lots of people recently, when they've found out or hear stories about my background, because obviously you can't tell by my accent or. And so, I mean, I even had, during the Brexit debate, because obviously I was against Brexit, I had quite a close friend who I've known for a lot of years. We were discussing, and she said, oh, but we can't be having all these Romanians coming over here. And I sort of looked at her, thinking, because obviously she'd obviously for that slight moment forgot.
Yeah. Did she say, "Oh, I don't mean you"?
Well, not in so many words, whether she didn't associate Romania with Hungary or whatever.
Oh.
And so it's been quite a bit of an eye-opener. But I did read quite an interesting statement today. I can't tell you who wrote it, but it was about the emperor's new clothes.
Yeah.
Right? And when it's like, you see that the emperor's... But for Trump, it's almost as if he said, yes, look, I'm naked. I don't have any new clothes.
Gosh.
I don't have any clothes.
And they're still cheering.
And they're still cheering and they're still loving him.
They're shouting down with clothes. Clothes are awful.
So I just wonder if some are going down that route by basically saying, it's I don't care sort of what language I'm using or whatever. This is it, and love me or get rid of me.
Yeah, and that idea. I mean, you mentioned her own background. I don't know about skin colour. I think it's an absolute minefield to talk about that in the context
I know it is.
of her motivations. Yeah. But as a fellow refugee, I think you can talk about that in the same way Dominic Raab's family followed the same path. I think that your family did, didn't they? Dominic Raab's family. Yeah. So I find the support for what feel a lot like anti-refugee policies from people who've benefited from it. I just find it harder to understand than I do when it's...
And I think, to me, a lot of the people as well that are really sort of buy into this and against it and have this sort of fear and what have you. And I look and I think to them, how many have you met?
That's always the point, isn't it? I've met all the ones on one of Nigel Farage's disgusting posters, but of course they haven't met any of them. They've met people like you, but they don't mean you. They don't mean you, Clara.
No.
Can I ask you a silly question?
Right, yes.
Do you ever watch I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here?
No, I don't.
The one in the jungle. Do you know the one in the jungle when they go to the jungle and they go?
I mean, I've not seen it for a lot of years. I know friends talk about it. And
do you want to know it's just been announced who's going on it? It's a politician who's been quite high profile over the last 5 years. Do you want to have a guess at who it is?
Oh, I might have seen some. No, go on.
Matt Hancock.
Really?
Yeah.
Matt Hancock.
Wow. I know. The world's gone mad, Clara.
I know, dear me.
Thank you for calling me today. You've cheered me right up. No, thank you so much. And you look after yourself. Take care.
Right. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Clara. It's 10:45. It is 10:49. And of course, I mean, again, social media is abuzz with people pointing out parallels for Suella Braverman's horrible words yesterday. Nick Griffin in August of 2020. Do you remember him? He used to lead the British National Party. He used the word invasion in August of 2020. And I do, and it's a journalist on the Jewish Chronicle who has, he certainly used to be on the Jewish Chronicle, who's pointed that out. And I do, having done this job for so long, and I wouldn't necessarily describe it as a privilege to have been exposed to so much racism in my working life, but it's certainly a perspective that is hard to achieve if you don't do something like this for a living. I mean, not just on the days when Sadiq Khan is in the studio and my inbox turns into an absolute sewer. Anyone can see that sort of stuff on social media. It's a miracle he hasn't been blamed yet for the events in Dover on Sunday. But just the unapologetic hatred, that's the point. It's unapologetic. The accounts now that are full of CCTV footage or camera phone footage of crimes always being committed by people by black people, as if that is evidence that all black people are criminals. And oddly, all of the crimes committed by white people are completely absent from these accounts. They are dedicated and they are unapologetic. So while I understand the desire to point out these comparisons between what Suella Braverman has said and what people like Nick Griffin or Enoch Powell have said in the past, I think there's a naivety to it, because I think a lot of people, even if they're not prepared to do it publicly yet, will be privately quite happy with that. Yep. Well, he was right too. Nick Griffin, if you don't remember him, was sort of like Farage without the golf club demeanour. There was very little to choose between them, I think, politically, for want of a better word. But he didn't have that sort of hail fellow, well met, that spivvy exterior, that very carefully cultivated fake gentleman shtick going on. Griffin was uncomfortable in his own skin. And that is the only difference. So, Enoch Powell, Nick Griffin, Nigel Farage, really? You think that people are going to be put off by having it pointed out that Suella Braverman is in many ways their spiritual successor, if we're to take the words she said yesterday and her comments about dreaming about deportations at face value? I don't know that that's true. I'm afraid some people will be lapping it up. What we do about that, I do not know. It's a question as old as humanity itself. James is in Lincoln. James, what would you like to say?
Hi, good morning, James. I'm glad you used the word fascistic because, to my mind, that's exactly what it is. And I think people and politicians for too long have shied away from calling that out because of its obvious resonance with Germany between 33 and 45. You think back to Braverman's speech at the party conference, when I would have to say she wasn't under threat at the time.
No.
She gave us that dystopian perversion of Martin Luther King's dream, which was to bring people of colours and creeds together from all over the world. And yet her dream was to take people living in abject misery, stick them on a plane, wave the Union Jack and see them off and send them to abject misery.
I don't know. I mean, certainly to send them against their will to somewhere that they had no connection with or desire to go to.
Yeah, but I think where I would disagree with you, James, just in terms of
course,
trying to apply some deeper strategy or tactic to what she was doing in the House of Commons yesterday to distract from her other issues. I think the real issue with Braverman is that she believes what she says. She believes in it. It's who she is, and she's not afraid to say it out loud.
No.
She almost revels and relishes the public acclaim that she gets from the extreme right-wing press and the right wing of her party.
She does. That's a really good point. She really believes this stuff. That doesn't necessarily undermine my suggestion that she wouldn't have gone quite so far as she did yesterday if she wasn't in so much peril professionally.
Yeah, I would agree with you if again, going back to party conference, when she wasn't under threat.
Wasn't during her speech, that. It was during an event.
With a fringe meeting.
Yeah, with the Daily Telegraph. I mean, a bit like remember what Jess Phillips got into bother for calling Tories scum at a meeting. The guard is down a bit more at those sort of things. Just a bit. It's just an explanation, not an excuse.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess... some of the press are calling her, as you said earlier on, giving her the first name treatment this morning, Suella. I have a first name one for her, and I will say it, and I'd call her Cruella.
Yes, okay.
Because,
you appreciate you haven't come up with that yourself. It's already out there.
Oh, well, fair enough. But yeah, I don't think this lady has any redeeming qualities whatsoever to qualify her as a Home Secretary.
And that's the point, really. And this is what was particularly hideous about what she said yesterday. The other bits that she said yesterday, you say that, and then she says, well, the only reason you want to get rid of her is because you're somehow worried that she's going to solve the problem. What is the next line of that logic?
Oh, exactly. And you said earlier on, 12 years of Conservative rule.
Yes.
The best we can do is put these poor people into, if you want to call them camps, call them centres, call them whatever you will. But we haven't come up with any strategy to actually deal. And I will avoid using the word processing because they aren't pieces of meat. They're human beings.
Yes, of course.
Like you and I, irrespective of the colour of their skin or where they've come from. They've endured hardship, depravity on the way to get to these shores. And in 12 years, the Conservative government, of which Braverman has been a part for quite some time, haven't come up with a strategy.
It's the mad bit, isn't it? The mad bit is she's standing there describing her own team. Sorry, I want to squeeze in one more call, James, before the news. And just to add to what James was saying to us, the that 12-year angle, and if you want to include the recent uptick in Albanian criminal gangs trafficking people into the country with the plan of putting them to work in criminal enterprises, then that is just an even more compelling argument for having a proper system of process and for having returns agreements with either Albania itself or with countries through which these people would have travelled. But we don't have that because we tore it up after Brexit, which the same people caused that are now being most unpleasant about this catastrophe. That's where the frustration lies for honest people, is they literally created this problem as a consequence of the thing that they said would reduce immigration without having any economic or moral basis for wanting to reduce immigration. But they won that argument where we must reduce immigration, but they've made the small boats crossings immeasurably worse. Anyone going to say sorry anytime soon? Harry's in Newton Abbot. Harry, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm lucky enough that when I was in sixth form, I was friends with people from all over the world, all colours, all creeds, religions. And I was lucky enough to meet some German friends, and they were some of the nicest people I've ever met. And so I spent some time out in Germany, and the thing that shocks me the most is that they've learned from their history. The Nazi iconography is still on show for people to learn about. Yeah. The messages that Adolf Hitler said from his balcony is taught to the children. They're made to go to Birkenau. They're made to go to Dachau and Auschwitz, and they learn about this stuff. So when it rears its ugly head again, they can see it from a mile off. And the problem is that a lot of this country, I don't know that they would like to identify themselves as that. But
well, we don't have that in our history. I understand the point you make. Just for the record, I should say it was Angela Rayner that called the Tory scum, not Jess Phillips. It's not necessarily an easy mistake to make, but I somehow managed to make it. Sorry, Harry.
We don't have that in our country's history, and they do. So when this stuff comes up, they see it for what it is. They see it as racist, fascist, sort of awful, depriving language. I mean, you could replace human beings for rats, and that speech that Suella gave yesterday would still hold the same amount of vitriol and vile, awful words that she said. She's not speaking about people, and that's what she's trying to do. Is she's targeting this UKIP.
Well, it's dehumanising, isn't it? I mean, categorically, you can't. And if you use the Albanian issue as a wedge to get into the issue, then you are dehumanising everybody, the way she spoke yesterday. It's not directed solely at bogus asylum seekers who may be part of criminal gangs. She didn't say anything about all the people who are genuine, all the people who are desperate, all the children who are sleeping on floors in marquees in Kent. It's incredible, really, and it's all on her.
It's all on her. It's all on the Tory government. It's all on Brexit. But they don't want to face up to that because that would be political suicide for them. So what they'd rather do is dehumanise entire populations of people, make them look like they're the evil people in this situation, not the government that's housing these people for days and weeks and months on end, not the people that are screaming racist abuse or throwing firebombs at centres. Yes. They're not the bad people. The bad people are the ones that are so desperate and so deprived of human rights that they have to travel with their young children over perilous oceans just to get some form of safety. They're the ones that are bad, not the people that shout and scream at centres.
Right. You know, it's incredible.
I live in Newton Abbot. We're an incredibly white area. Yeah. Devon is 97% white. Devon is. The people down here are so out of touch with the real world that when a migrant boat turned up in Paignton with 20 people on it, they thought it was going to take over the town centre. 20 people. An
invasion, wasn't it?
An invasion of 20 people because they were different. They weren't human. They were animals that needed to be sorted.
I hear you. I know I've got to go to the news, but you remind me as you speak about that comparative triumph of the last year and the simple question of how we could manage to do the right thing as a population. It wasn't much of a government-led endeavour, but as a population, we managed to do the right thing by Ukrainians. There's a big question there of why Suella Braverman is talking about refugees who aren't from Ukraine in such terms. It just, one spoken of as humans and the other, as Harry reminds us, not really spoken of as humans. Make of that what you will. 11:01 is the time. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm not going to lie to you. I do have 5 or 10 minutes some mornings where I think, should we talk about this? Should we ignore this? Are we falling into their trap? Are we playing their game? I can't. Luckily, I can console myself with the knowledge that I think we've done more on Suella Braverman's breaches of national security, her complete contempt for the ministerial code, her lies, almost certain lies about her original resignation, stroke sacking. So at least, there's no either or involved in this. But yesterday was huge. Yesterday was a very, very big deal. And there's one element missing so far from the commentary that is so huge and so obvious that when I explain it to you in a moment, you will, like me, like I just did during the news there, when the penny dropped for me, you'll slap your metaphorical forehead. But here she is, here is the Home Secretary of Great Britain and Northern Ireland in the actual House of Commons yesterday.
The British people deserve to know which party is serious about stopping the invasion on our southern coast and which party is not. Some 40,000 people have arrived on the south coast this year alone, many of them facilitated by criminal gangs, some of them actual members of criminal gangs. So let's stop pretending that they are all refugees in distress.
She had very little to say about the ones who are refugees in distress, and I'm not sure anybody is pretending that they are all refugees in distress. That's why you need to have a proper application process, and ideally at the end of it you have ways to do what we could do before we left the European Union. But this word invasion, that's what's got everybody talking today, isn't it? This word invasion. And what it needs is a dictionary. A lot of people getting in touch to say, she's right. If 40,000 people isn't an invasion, then what is? And I, as ever, partly because it's the way that I'm built and partly probably because I was raised very much in the Christian faith, I try to meet you. I try to give you the benefit of the doubt. I try to believe that you're capable of moving towards the light. So you're using this word invasion. The problem with the use of the word invasion is that it imputes motive. So, listen, you can pretend that it doesn't mean any of these things, and that if 40,000 members of your family come round for Christmas, then that is an invasion. You can pretend that that's what you mean. It's just an utterly innocuous word that is a synonym for arrival. All right? But you know that it isn't, and Suella Braverman knows that it isn't. This is the point. So just a random online dictionary offers up 4 definitions of the word invasion, and this is what all the commentary misses. This is what all of the people saying, well, her language might have been quite inflammatory, but an awful lot of people agree with her. This is what your Jonathan Gullises and your sundry other headbangers, they know this is true, but they don't admit it out loud. Invasion, 4 basic definitions here. An act or instance of invading or entering as an enemy, especially by an army. So when she uses that word invasion, she is deliberately and consciously depicting children currently sleeping on floors in a giant tent in Kent as being an enemy. An enemy. Definition 2, the entrance or advent of anything troublesome or harmful, such as disease. So when the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, uses the word invasion to describe asylum seeking, she is consciously and deliberately depicting children currently sleeping on the floor in a tent in Kent as being troublesome or harmful or like a disease. And not just the children, of course, but also the adults. Now, you might be comfortable using those descriptions, those depictions, when you're talking about these Albanian criminals that we are hearing so much about. But Suella Braverman deliberately and consciously applied it to all of them yesterday. She talked about 40,000 people in the context of an invasion. She didn't talk, for example, about 7,000, which is the estimated number of Albanian migrants who have been trafficked here to work on cannabis farms in large numbers. So why mention 40,000? Why use the number 40,000 if she's only talking about the criminals being trafficked here by criminal gangs? Why would she want all 40,000 asylum seekers to be described using a word that means an act or instance of invading or entering as an enemy, especially by an army, or the entrance or advent of anything troublesome or harmful, such as disease. Why would she do that? Why would she say 40,000, not 7,000? Answer, she believes that all 40,000 are an enemy or a disease. Definition number 3, entrance as if to take possession or overrun. Now, there is a mildly positive interpretation of that word. You could say the annual invasion of the resort by tourists, for example. But she doesn't mean that, does she? Because tourist resorts generally welcome tourists. So she's talking about entrance as if to take possession or overrun. She's using the word to describe the idea that these people are going to take from the rest of us, that they are going to steal, that they are going to rob. And she's not talking about 7,000 possible criminals. She's talking about 40,000 people, including the children who are sleeping on the floor in a giant tent in Kent. And finally, relatively innocuous language, infringement by intrusion. So it is almost impossible, even at middle school level, to find a definition of invasion that does not imply bad motives on the part of the invader. In fact, it is obviously impossible to use the word invasion without deliberately depicting the invader as a bad thing, as an enemy, as an army, as a disease, as something troublesome or harmful, something entering as an enemy, something taking possession or overrunning, something infringing, something intruding. And that is why what Suella Braverman did yesterday is disgusting. Because if you're going, oh, it's absolutely right, she's 100% correct, that's absolutely the definition that she means, that's fine. Then why didn't she use the word incursion? Or why didn't she use the word arrival? Why didn't she use the word visit or arrive? Why use the word invasion when it has so many negative connotations? Answer, she loves the negative connotations. Answer, she stokes the negative connotations. Answer, the negative connotations are her bread and butter. And now we ask ourselves, why would she do this? Why would she so deliberately seek to depict tens of thousands of innocent people? If you want to cling to the idea that some thousands of them are guilty of being trafficked, somehow they're simultaneously victims and criminals, which is technically true, I suppose. So park that if you need to. Let's take the estimated 7,000 who don't deserve to be treated with respect, although, of course, the law demands that their applications are processed properly. Take the 30-odd thousand that are left. Why would she want to depict them as an invading enemy or an army or a disease or something troublesome or something harmful? Why? Because she's in desperate amounts of trouble. So what does she do next? She knits together the depiction of wholly innocent asylum seekers as being disease or enemy or criminal, and she knits it with a frankly ludicrous claim, straight out of the populist playbook, that the real reason why people don't want her to be doing her job has absolutely nothing to do with all of the appalling behaviours she's already undertaken, whether it's compromising national security, whether it's riding roughshod over the ministerial code, whether it's lying about the circumstances of her dismissal from the Home Office a fortnight ago. Oh, no, 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 no. All of the people calling for her to be fired again are not remotely concerned about the things that she's actually done while in office. They're terrified of something that she might do at some unspecified point in the future, because all of her enemies are secretly, or even perhaps publicly and explicitly, enormous fans of human beings risking their lives crossing the English Channel in flimsy dinghies. Think about the next line of this logic, if you've fallen for it. She said, oh no, they just want to get rid of me because they hate the fact that I'm really going to get on top of this problem. You think people are queuing up around this country to go, what do we want? More dinghy crossings. When do we want them? Now. Of course they're not. There's not even a veneer of logic to what she says. But since when did demagoguery have a veneer of logic? And here's the next stage of the play. Here's the bit where she lies about why people want someone who has breached the ministerial code made a mockery of national security, lied about why she got fired from her job 3 weeks ago. Here's the bit where she lies about the real reasons why people want her out of the Home Office as soon as possible.
Illegal migration is out of control, and too many people are more interested in playing political parlour games, covering up the truth, than solving the problem. I, Madam Deputy Speaker, am utterly serious about ending the scourge of illegal migration, and I am determined to do whatever it takes to break the criminal gangs and fix our hopelessly lax asylum system. That, Madam Deputy Speaker, is why I am in government. And that is why there are some people who would prefer to be rid of me. Yeah. Well,
order! I should just point out that I can hear who's making the noise, and it'll be a long time before they're called to ask a question. Secretary of State.
Madam Deputy Speaker, let them try.
Because, of course, people who want refugees to be treated with dignity and respect are also the people who are constantly cheerleading for illegal immigration and criminal gangs. That's the Home Secretary in the House of Commons talking undiluted, despicable twaddle again. Again, once you break it, it all slots into place, doesn't it? Once the penny drops, everything, that's it. It is as simple as a meaning, the meaning of the word invade. Thanks to Kathy, who reminds us it actually comes from the Latin, popping up in the late 15th century, from the Latin invadere, to go, come or get into, to enter violently, to penetrate into as an enemy, to assail, to assault, to make an attack on. Invade. Why use the word invasion, Suella? Oh, because I want to portray absolutely every refugee as an enemy. And if not, then a disease. There it is. So listen, you can defend it. You can say she absolutely used the right words. She absolutely used the right description. It absolutely fits. But that's what you're agreeing with, that all refugees are enemies and a form of disease, all of them. And that, of course, would include, for many people who can't see the distinction between refugees and other forms of immigration, that would include anybody who has come here from overseas, which becomes ever more hard to unravel for those of us who sort of try to prioritise humanity over anything else. 21 minutes after 11, 0345 6060973. Is the number that you need. The point is the process, of course. There are always arguments you can make about, well, what happens when there's 10 million people coming here? So what if it's only 40,000? Then you have to have a proper system in place. And they've had 12 years to build one. 12 years to build one. And we still take a fraction per capita of what many of our European neighbours take. Never mind countries elsewhere in the world. I think Cyprus, in terms of per capita population, takes way more than the rest of Europe. Presumably because it's going to be a sort of crossing point from the Middle East. 22 minutes after 11 is the time. Durim is in Catford. Durim, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, mate. What's on your mind?
What's on my mind? First time caller here, to your programme, so might be a bit nervous.
Don't be. It's only me.
What do I want to say? So I was speaking to your researcher earlier. I'm an Albanian myself, and I've been here for 23 years now.
Yeah.
And to still hear the same rhetoric from Suella Braverman now, it's, to say the very least, frustrating. I remember back in 2012 when Theresa May used the kind of same language by saying that, creating a hostile environment for illegal immigrants in Britain, and I thought that we have moved on from that. But yet, here we find ourselves 10 years later using the very same rhetoric again.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really want to pick any holes in what you've said because you're talking about your life and I'm merely reporting on what I see. But I think that the difference is there not. I mean, there is a case for arguing, or no, there is a case. It is clear that Albanian criminal gangs are trafficking people into the country, which is clearly not what applied to you. And it's also the case that Albania is in the process of trying to join the European Union. So the likelihood of a case for asylum being bogus is much higher with Albanian people than it is with, for example, Syrian or Afghan people. Is that fair? I think that's fair to say that.
It is fair, but I've worked my other job. I'm a therapist, so I have worked with young Albanians that have arrived lately in the UK.
Right.
Provided some one-to-one counselling service for them. And if a 14, 15-year-old has taken that initiative to pay the amount of money they pay, £15,000 to £20,000, to arrive in this country, travelling in rough seas across Europe, in the conditions that they have. I mean, you were talking about humanity earlier. I mean,
yes.
Is this not? If this is not a good reason for anyone to sort of a good enough reason for anyone to move from one country to another, then I don't know what is.
No, I hear you. I'm not familiar with that category of human. I don't know whether I've fallen into a trap or whether I've just been a little bit simplistic. I read about Albanians being trafficked here by criminal gangs in order to go to work underground in cannabis farms or elsewhere like that. I'm not familiar with the. I mean, and also you where does a teenager get 15 grand from in order to?
Well, it's either money that they have borrowed from other people, or depends on the.
So this is an entirely voluntary journey, in other words, rather than a criminal enterprise designed to provide staff for criminal enterprises.
I think it's a voluntary journey.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: if these criminal gangs, let's assume for a moment that there are the criminal gangs that bring the Albanians in here. If they hear, as they would hear, the same rhetoric and language that is used here now, it's not like it's going to prevent anyone. If anything, will have the opposite effect. The prices will go higher. It's a business on its own, James, and as I'm sure yourself and myself and other people know that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much we don't understand, isn't there? There's so much that we don't fully grasp because of the way that it's reported. And I think that the people you speak about are deserving of support and succour. And I'm glad that you're providing it. It doesn't change the meaning of that word invade, though, does it? That everyone, whether they are innocent, whether they are genuine refugees, whether they are economic migrants, whether they are being trafficked by criminal gangs, the deliberate deployment of the word invasion implies that they wish us harm, that they wish us no good, and that's the fundamental heartbreak, isn't it? At the centre of all of these conversations, people like you are portrayed as wishing harm to people like me.
And
I don't know how you break that spell. I don't know how you break that spell, Jureem.
It's difficult. I used to get even more angrier and frustrated with that before, but because of the job that I do and other things that I'm involved with, I've taken a step back and not let it affect me as much.
As a therapist, you have to do that. You have to learn how to not get too invested and too involved in these things. Also, Julie tells me, with reference to a Home Affairs correspondent at the BBC, that about 53% of Albanian claimants who do go through the system, some of course disappear, are granted asylum. What might an Albanian asylum seeker be seeking asylum from?
Because of the situation in Albania at the moment, although Albania is trying to join the EU, there are still a lot of problems there. So why an Albanian might seek an asylum here in this country could be. Many of the cases that I've worked with are blood feuds, which the country and the police in there don't have the situation under the control at all. And threatening situation, risk of life, and yet, people do talk about, a lot of tourists now are starting to go to Albania and exploring that, and then they probably say that the country is looking good, it's looking okay. But
Sure.
if you look at the inside or and what's happening in there, it's a completely different story. So these are some of the reasons why an Albanian might claim an asylum in this country. But having worked with these young people, they don't want to come here to work in cannabis farms.
No.
You know, in the sessions that I've had with them, without disclosing a lot due to confidentiality, they just want to work. They just want to be given the opportunity to work, even whilst their case is looked at by the Home Office. But what we do, we don't give them work. We just keep them somewhere in a hostel somewhere there, pay them the amount of money that we pay them, and it just ends up costing more and more. I don't understand. It's a system that is not fit for purpose at all. And to use the language now to say that they're the invading from what? Invading what? I don't know.
That is the point, you see. And there's a chicken and egg going on here. Suella Braverman is appealing to people who see all foreigners, whether refugees or not, as being enemies, as being an invading force, as being disease, whatever word you prefer from the dictionary. And of course, by deploying that language, she also probably pushes new people into a similar camp. She creates the idea in the minds of people who hadn't previously been harbouring vile bigotries like that. She creates new bigots, if you like, and she does it deliberately. She does it on purpose, and it is hard. It is just horrible. I mean, we've got to talk about it. It's important to talk about it. We've got to hold the line. Got to remember that people like Jureen wish no harm whatsoever to people like me, whatever Suella Braverman may want huge swathes of the British population to believe, and of course whatever huge swathes of the British population already believe. 11:30 is the time. I wasn't joking, by the way, when I spoke to Clara earlier. Clara, the refugee from Hungary in 1956, now living in Teesdale. Matt Hancock really is going on to I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. The former health secretary who presided over that absolute catastrophe in our care homes at the onset of the coronavirus crisis, and who was never actually fired, even though he was, you know what he was doing. He's had the whip suspended already. My colleague Mikey said he's had the whip removed, and I said, where from? I said he's had the whip suspended by the Conservative Party, but he's going into I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. I mean, what do the satirists do now? What do you do if we weren't in the business of talking about the news? If we were supposed to be making jokes about it all the time, what do you do now? Matt Hancock's doing what? He's going into the jungle. Oh, of course he is. One part of me is quite relieved because a good friend of mine is in the jungle this year, and I was worried, given his reputation, I was worried that he might be put up for a lot of tasks. I'm fairly confident that Matt Hancock is more likely to get the public vote for the consumption of kangaroo testicles than, well, I'll tell you who it is actually after the very latest news headlines with Lottie Morley. It is 11:36. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, continuing the conversation about the refugee crisis. Just bizarre now, isn't it? The idea that the Conservative government can put up one of its most senior members after 12 years of power to claim that everything's broken. I think Priti Patel claimed it was all broken 2 years ago. What do they do all day, these people? And of course, the suspicion that they don't want to fix anything because there's no point having some scapegoats if they don't have to, if the scapegoats have all been solved, is there? You need to have people providing the red meat, if you like. I continue with the conversation for a bit, and then we might talk about Matt Hancock. It's Chris Moyles, of course, the breakfast presenter on Radio X, this former saviour of Radio 1. Chris Moyles, who's a pal of mine, is going into the jungle, going into I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. He told me a couple of weeks ago I wasn't allowed to say anything, and I thought he was joking. I saw him outside, and we get the lift up together, and he said, I'm off now for 6 weeks. And I was jealous. I said, what do you mean you're not allowed to take 6 weeks off? I've made inquiries about a sabbatical or something like that. Problem is with RAJAR, if you're not here, you know, well, mine might go up, who knows? But the point is you're not allowed to have really long holidays. It's not the BBC. And I said, there's no way they'd let you take 6 weeks off. And he goes, oh, yes, I think you'll find they are. And I'm like, what do you mean? And he's got that little twinkle in his eye. And he says, you're not allowed to tell anyone, but I'm going in the jungle. I said, seriously? He goes, yeah. He goes, I'm flying out on Monday. This was a couple of Fridays ago. So he's been out there a while already. I think they have to get acclimatised, stuff like that. I gave him a hug. I don't mind telling you. A manly hug, obviously, but, you know, I think it's grim. I've had a couple of mates do it in the past. Ian Lee did it, of course, formerly of this parish. Had a mixed experience. He had some terrible treatment from Rebecca Vardy, who, of course, turned out to be an absolutely lovely person, didn't she, with that trial business. And my mate James McVeigh did it as well, the guitarist and singer with the Vamps. Lovely lad, really nice lad. And I think he had a better time of it than Ian, but it's a pretty brutal experience. You don't realise that when you see it on the telly. So I worry for Moyles. I gave him a hug. I wish him well. I'm delighted that Matt Hancock is doing it now, because it means that there is at least one person who the public are going to desire to see jumping off high platforms or eating kangaroo testicles even more than they will want to see Chris Moyles doing it, who is, I can tell you this, he is terrified of heights. That would be his fear. Matt Hancock doing I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. It just speaks of an absence of seriousness. Does he have any constituents, or is he one of those MPs like Boris Johnson who somehow doesn't have any constituents? Also, why was Boris Johnson allowed to go on holiday to the Caribbean and not lose the whip? Hancock could be back in a week. He could be the first person voted off it. Oh no, you have to stay to the end, don't you? Because you've got to do the closing party and all that sort of thing. He might be able to negotiate something. Why is Johnson allowed to go on holiday? I do not know. 11:39 is the time. I'd like to talk about that, a little bit of light relief, but at this point in proceedings, I'm not entirely sure what we'd say. It's never stopped us in the past, has it? Back to the big moment, the big story of the moment, rather. Run you through a few of the points shortly, but first, Robert is in Maidstone, which is sort of in the vicinity, isn't it, of where many of these problems are unfolding. Robert, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, hi there, James.
Hello,
bear with me, a little nervous. First sort of thing that I felt really that passionate and it's built up enough to give you a call about.
Gosh.
So I work in Maidstone, but I live in Dover and have done for about 20 odd years since my dad left the army when I was a kid.
Okay.
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about Suella Braverman.
Yeah.
What's really annoyed me about it, and I'd like to, some people might say she's being clever, like football managers who take the pressure off themselves by kicking a bottle, and then you're not talking about how rubbish their £90 million striker is. You're talking about, all right?
It's a good point.
But she isn't clever enough to do that. But what's the reason I've called and hung on because I really wanted to speak to you about it is inadvertently, and you kind of alluded it to yourself a little bit. She stopped you guys in the media and the general public as an extension of that,